Hi, I'm Phil Ingrassia, president of RVDA, and I'm pleased to be joined by Tom Kline of Vantage Point. Tom is RVDA's endorsed consultant on a number of issues, including this safeguards rule. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom for a very important update on some changes that the FTC made to some deadlines regarding the safeguards rule. Tom, can you take it away?
I will. Thanks for having me, Phil. Great to be here as always. So the FTC in the middle of November changed the deadline from December 9th, 2022, so this December, to June 9th. And there's been a lot of information in the press because people think that everything has been extended when that is really not the case. And so the purpose of today's very brief presentation is to make sure you understand what has to be done and in what time frame. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on what I call the first new deadline, which was actually January 10th of this current year. And in my travels to RV dealers and in conversations, there's a lot of work to be done here. And so I'm going to go through what needs to be done as far as the safeguards rule. So first of all, the safeguard rule history, the original effective date was May 23rd of 2003. That's when they came out with the physical safeguards and what you should be doing to make sure that you're protecting customer data. As of January 10th of this year, however, you are required to conduct a security risk assessment. And then based on your risk assessment, you're supposed to have your information security program. And as we talked about, the original deadline was December 9th, now moved to June 9th of 2023. Here are the items that the FTC extended. Number one was designate a qualified individual to oversee your information security program. So by June 9th, you're going to have to designate one person, in my experience, that has been the dealer or the CFO of the company, develop a written risk assessment. By January 10th of this year, you're supposed to have done the risk assessment. It doesn't necessarily have to be in writing until June 9th. But I'd recommend that you put it in writing as soon as possible. The third bullet, limit and monitor who can access sensitive customer information. This is a big one, folks. So think about all of your online logins and who has administrative privileges to get in. In many dealerships, people share logins, or there's one general login for certain functions like the CRM. And you don't want to give access to that CRM, I should say unfettered access to the CRM, by something like a salesperson. And a nefarious salesperson could potentially download all of the names on the CRM and you wouldn't know, and then you've got a data breach because you don't know what that person's going to do with it. So limiting and monitoring who can access this sensitive information is important. You're supposed to encrypt all sensitive information, train security personnel, and the press release here, and this comes directly from their press release, is a little misleading because the new regulations say that everyone at the dealership has to be trained. That includes lot porters and service technicians and everyone. You're supposed to develop an incident response plan by June 9th about what happens if you do have a data breach. Periodically assess the security practices of your service providers. So that's all the people who transmit personally identifiable information. So your website providers and your CRM and your DMS, all those. And then implement a multi-factor authentication or MFA or another method with equivalent protection for anybody accessing customer information. So these are all the items that were moved till June 9th. But you were supposed to already have developed, and I use the word shall, it's not may develop, it's shall develop. You shall develop a written information security program. that describes the administrative, technical, and physical safeguards. So an example of an administrative safeguard would be making sure that not everybody is using the same login. A physical safeguard is making sure that your F&I manager's offices are locked. I always recommend a door closer on those, Phil, because anybody can walk in and grab all kinds of personally identifiable information because the business managers have that in their office. And these are supposed to be appropriate to your size and complexity and the sensitivity of any customer information to issue. Well, we know that you have a 10 out of 10 in terms of the sensitivity because you have their date of birth and their social and how much they make and potentially their tax returns and pay stubs and home address, STIPs with home addresses on them and that kind of thing. So you have a 10 out of 10 in terms of sensitivity of the information, but you're allowed to have an information security program that's appropriate to your size and your complexity of your operation. Only you can determine that based on what your risk criteria are and what kind of risk you're willing to take on for regulations like this. Information security program, you're supposed to base your program on a risk assessment that identifies reasonably foreseeable internal and external risks. So an internal risk would be like the example I gave a minute ago of the salesman logging into your CRM and downloading thousands of names. External risks in terms of security, confidentiality, and integrity of the customer information that could result in unauthorized disclosure, misuse, alteration, destruction, or compromise of the information, and assesses the sufficiency of any safeguards in place. So you're supposed to do a risk assessment of your physical structure. So how is your network set up? What are the vulnerabilities there? Do you have open ports? Are those things that you know of? You have to write them down and assess the risk so that you can then come up with a plan on what you're going to do to make sure that those risks are taken care of. The risk assessment, and this is directly from the regulation, you shall, not you may, you shall periodically perform additional risk assessments that re-examine the reasonable, foreseeable internal and external risks to the security and confidentiality of the customer information that can result in unauthorized disclosure or a compromise of such information, and reassess the safeguards in place to control those risks. Also in effect as of January, you were supposed to have tested or otherwise monitor your safeguard controls, systems, and procedures, and including those to detect the actual and attempted attacks or intrusions into your information system. So do you know, will you know, or would you know when someone was trying to get in, trying to hack your system? Do you have safeguards for that? Are you using appropriate software, patchware, making sure you have antivirus? All those things are important. And so you were supposed to have already tested or monitored that. The service providers, those are the people, your website providers, your CRM, your DMS. You should have been taking reasonable steps to select and retain those providers that are capable of maintaining appropriate safeguards for the customer information. Now, as of June 9th, you're going to have that information encrypted. It will have to be encrypted. Any PII, and the definition of PII will change to include home addresses and email addresses and cell phone numbers, and then the regular dates of birth and social security numbers. So are your providers trying to safeguard your customer information? Have you contacted them? Do you know what you're doing about that? And have you documented that? And requiring them by contract to implement and maintain such safeguards. You're required to contract with them to make sure that they're doing this. Again, it's not the encryption yet, but that is coming as of June 9th. Evaluate and adjust your information security program in light of testing and monitoring. So when you test, how what happened, and then what did you do to adjust? Any material change to your operation. So as there have been a lot of transactions in the RV world, if you've bought another store, that would be considered a material change. And what have you done to make sure that that new store is on board with your other policies? What are the results of your risk assessment or any other circumstances which might have a material impact on your information security program? The FTC has been active in data breach cases, not having to do with the RV world, but pure and simple data breaches, and they had been fining companies. Cafe Press is one of them that I can think of off the top of my head, but there have been others. So they are active in this space. And Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act gives them the authority on the bottom left of the screen to prohibit unfair methods of competition in or affecting commerce, and not protecting customer data is one of those things. And they can still come in and fine you under the UDAP statutes. UDAP stands for unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts and practices. So even though the deadline was extended to June the 9th, they still have the authority to come in and to act if anything they think is going wrong, or you do have a data breach at your dealership. And that's all for the January 10th deadline, Phil. This is my information. If anybody would like a copy of the deck, I'm happy to send it to them. If anybody has any questions, they can certainly feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to answer the questions.
Well, thanks a lot, Tom. And just one quick follow-up. I know a lot of the vendors, including some of the insurance agencies, some of the service agreement providers, have been providing some information to the dealers, but it's basically been telling them what they need to do. How can you help, and the dealers you work with through your company, what can you do to help dealers make sure they're on the right side of these new regulations?
Sure. As an example, I was at a dealership on Monday and Tuesday and spent 10 hours putting a plan together with all of their IT structure. And it took one full day. It took 2 days of 5 hours, but it was one full day, making sure that we had a plan moving forward. So I'll provide a map essentially of what they need to do, and then we'll talk through every single piece. There is some information on the Better Vantage Point website about that. If somebody wants to watch a video, or as I said, feel free to reach out to me. But I will walk them through each piece of this and make sure that they understand the risks on one side for not complying with a certain part of this, what can happen. We talk about cyber insurance because that's certainly part of it. There are some very complicated parts of the cyber policy. I spent an hour or more on the phone with a cyber agent, insurance agent yesterday, and asked an hour's worth of questions based on a client's cyber policy. One of the things on this particular client that's important is they had a named threshold of 100,000 people on their cyber policy, and they had 350,000 names in their CRM and their DMS. So they were underinsured. So if they had had a data breach, it would have been a disaster. So being able to read the cyber policy and talk about those types of questions is really important in risk mitigation, making sure that we're protecting the dealer's assets so that they can move forward and sell RVs and service them and do what they need to do.
Well, great. And thank you very much. I mean, this is great information. And in addition to Tom's website here, if you ever need his services, it's always in each issue of RV Executive Today magazine for RVDA members that receive the magazine, and also on the RVDA website in our endorsed products and services links. So, Tom, thanks a lot. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you more on this important topic as we get towards the June deadline.
Very good. Thanks for having me, Phil.